Hi, welcome back to the Startup Operators Weekly Roundup. The Weekly Roundup is a show for people who like to stay updated with the latest developments from the Indian startup ecosystem. In this week's episode, Roshan and I will be talking about some of the comments which Prime Minister Modi made at the recently concluded 25th Bangalore Tech Summit. We'll talk about the key takeaways of the new draft Personal Data Protection Bill and also talk about how the lock-in period of the pre-IPO investors in some of the largest tech companies in India will be expiring soon, and what does that mean for investors like you and me. Apart from that, we'll be talking about how the gaming industry will be adding more than 1 lakh jobs in the next fiscal year, and of course the hottest take from last week, the battle between FHRAI and Oyo for Oyo's IPO plans. More on that in this week's episode, so stay tuned. But before beginning, a huge shout out to our sponsor. This episode of the Startup Operator Weekly Roundup is brought to you by Park Avenue. Wow, this has been some week, and of course, it's great to be back doing this roundups in person again.
Yeah.
How's
I mean,
the week
it's
for you?
well, there are plenty of events that happened last week, right? We had the G20 summit that happened, and pretty much everyone, the US or France and UK and so on, were quoting India, and that was refreshing to see. India is, in fact, going to host the next version of the G20 as well. So phenomenal. I mean, India's rise in the geopolitical stage continues on that front. We also had the COP27 as well, the climate change summit. And India has become one of the few countries in the world, maybe 50 odd countries, that have committed to a long term strategy for reducing carbon emissions. That again puts us in a very unique sort of a clique. If you remember COP26, India had committed to net zero by 2070, which is a very bold and ambitious aim, right? India is also showing how emerging economies can sort of adopt sustainability and so on, so which is fantastic to see. Well, today we're going to start another international event, the FIFA World Cup.
Yes.
There's a lot of chatter about who's going to be the
Yeah.
favorites and whatnot.
Which team are you supporting?
I really hope that Lionel Messi gets his last flourish, man. I mean, I really hope for that. Let's say, I mean, probably I don't know, Spain and Germany are maybe favorites. Who do you think are the favorites?
Well, if I were to bet on a team, I would be rooting for France. I think they have come a long way, and of course, it's time for France to return back to its glorious days, right? So
So
let's see.
there is a theory that the existing champions don't always win the next World Cup, right? Because they get to skip the pre-qualifiers apparently, and they don't end up playing as a unit. But let's say, I mean, France has a chance to sort of change that, right? Last week we spoke about Praram, which was Skyroot's first mission to space. In partnership with the ISRO, and that was a huge success. All those parameters that they used to measure the efficiency of the mission checked out, and again, huge congratulations to the Skyroot team as well. I've kind of approached them. Hopefully we can have them on the podcast, and this is a fantastic moment for India, I should say.
Yeah, and also over this weekend on Saturday, November 19th, we also celebrated Women Entrepreneurship Day, right? And this is, of course, to celebrate and commemorate all those fantastic women leaders out there who are making an impact within the ecosystem. Well, Roshan, I want to ask this to you. There are obvious positives of having more women in leadership positions as well as in the workforce, right? And we have had some stellar women founders and operators in the podcast as well. What differences did you notice having spoken to a fair share of women and men?
Well, I think it's in India's interest to make sure that there is optimal utilization of human capital, right? Which is men and women. And today, I mean, if you look at it, especially in rural India and so on, the productivity of women, right, is not that great. I mean, you can think of systemic things like household responsibilities and so on, and you can think of aspirational stuff as well, right? And that's where I mean, schemes like Ujjwala, for example, schemes like Nal Pe Jal, the LPG cylinder scheme, so on and so forth, right? I mean, all of these have helped households become a lot more efficient and has freed up a lot of time for women to embark on all of these vocational things or professional activities as such, right? So yeah, I mean, we're still a long way off, I think, but then I mean, we're headed towards the right direction. I think one of the first missions or first clarion calls of the Prime Minister along with Swachh Bharat was Beti Bachao, right? I mean, so there is a huge focus on that. In terms of women in leadership, right? I mean, I've noticed that women do tend to have a different style because obviously intrinsically they're wired differently, and there are a lot of benefits to that as well. Definitely more empathetic, definitely more caring. Someone could fish out a sociology paper on how women entrepreneurs fare with respect to their male counterparts, and how they better what they could improve upon, and so on and so forth. That would be curious to look at, I think. But yeah, I mean, we've hosted some fantastic women on the podcast. Yamini Bhatt, of course, my boss at Vimo. We've hosted Ashwini Ashokan, right? Prukalpa of Atlan, plenty others. Even in fact, I think the founder of Conversite as well, right? I mean, who we're going to talk about in their fundraise. I think probably about 15%, I would say, I would stick my neck out and say about 15-20% of the folks we've hosted on the podcast are women. We're always looking to add and improve that number. So, in case you have suggestions for fantastic women founders we should host, I mean, please let us know as well. That'd be great.
Yeah, and to celebrate Women Entrepreneurship Day, Mint has come up with a list of 100 women entrepreneurs. We'll post a link to the article in the description below, so do check it out. Well, so Prime Minister Modi was in Bangalore a few days back, inaugurating the 25th edition of the Bangalore Tech Summit. And during his speech, he mentioned how India has shown the world how to democratize technology and give tech a human touch. Now, I think that's a wonderful line considering the work we have done with with UPI, with Aadhaar, with India Stack,
Yeah.
Industrial 4.0. There's massive developments going on. What's your take on that?
I think, see, if you look at it globally, India's digital infrastructure is par excellence, right? I mean, I don't think another country compares, and especially not at the scale and complexity that we solve. Few of the things that you mentioned, whether it's Aadhaar or UPI, or even CoWIN for that matter, yeah. I mean, like over the last couple of years, I mean, these are population scale challenges that we've solved through technology, right? There's a lot of talk about DeFi, for example, decentralized finance, and how that is going to absolutely revolutionize the financial system. And while that is great, I mean, if you look at settlements in India, the sort of financial infrastructure that we have in India, the regulation that we have in India, etc., it's not as bad as the US, right?
Yeah.
US or even UK and other parts of the Europe as well, right? So I think, yeah, I mean, this is a fantastic thing, and also there's been a increased focus over the last 5 to 8 years in terms of digital delivery, whether it is vaccines, whether it is welfare, etc. I think we've been able to do all of this targeted welfare only because of technology, and I just hope that more difficult challenges are democratized to a wider base, and more people solve for these kind of things through technology.
Great. And over here, the partnership between governments and startups also come into play.
Yeah,
Like we have seen these drone tech companies that are partnering with governments in Andhra
yeah,
Pradesh and Telangana to actually map out rural areas and basis that distribute property
yeah,
cards.
yeah,
Right? I think these things really add up a lot in the
yeah.
long run.
No, I mean, see, look at the way we've pivoted our content itself, right? I mean, I think about a year ago, we would only focus on fundraisers, right? And today we hardly, I mean, we do cover fundraisers, but then it's a small part of what we do, right? I mean, there is just so much happening on the industrial policy front that it occupies, 30-40% of the conversation that we have on the roundup. So very promising signs, and I feel, 2020s and 2030s could be India's decades. Just last week, Gautam Adani said that India will perhaps be the second largest economy by 2050. That puts us at he projects a $30 trillion economy. And that is going to happen on the back of investments like these, right? I mean, population scale challenges that we solve through technology.
Right. But also, we're talking about how we are getting forward with technology and becoming more digitized. The government has recently put out the latest version of the new draft personal data protection bill. This was already tabled twice with industry leaders and has been even taken back for reconsideration. And with this latest draft, which is now open for industry recommendation, has 5 key points which we'll discuss. The first one is, of course, the definition of personal data. Now, personal data pertains to any data, which can be information, facts, concepts, or opinions, about an individual that helps identify that individual, which is collected either online or collected online but later digitized. The second one is consent removal by individuals. So, the IT ministry has asked applications to explain the terms of data collection to users in simple and clear terms so that folks like you and us can understand easily. It has also provided a clause that allows users to withdraw their consent whenever they want to. The third one is free cross-border flow of data, under which the bill suggests that it will allow for cross-border storage and transfer of data to quote unquote certain notified countries and territories. The fourth one is ease of compliance. The government is proposing to establish an online redressal forum called the Data Protection Board of India. And of course, there are some changes to the IT Act of 2000 pertaining to the penalties for negligence by a company when handling sensitive personal data of its customers and government's rights in making any rules in accordance with the personal data protection of Indians. Now, I think that is translates to scope of national security.
Yeah.
But what do you make of this?
I think this is a good draft. The previous draft had so many amendments and it had become so complicated that it was just a very hoary mess, right? I mean, the previous draft I think ran into hundreds of pages. This is perhaps about 30 pages or so. I'm yet to like read through the draft, but I just caught some of the highlights. A few different things, right? I think one is that it puts some onus on the individual persons as well, in terms of sharing data, offering consent, and then withdrawing it. Second thing is there was also some thought about redressal mechanisms, right? I mean, a lot of startups, a lot of tech MNCs, big tech, all of them had questions on, what is the process of redressal? And I think here, they've sorted that one out, including the penalties and, what is the mechanism for that. And the third is like talking about friendly countries, right? I mean, data is obviously very precious, right? And we have to be careful about, how we distribute this data, especially financial data, for example, right? Your cards and your transactions and so on. So there is a thought to like declare friendly countries and have easier restrictions on that, right? And also, I mean, they touch upon data of children, right? I mean, what data can guardians choose to share, and how that will sort of impact going forward, which I think is a very important thing, right? Because kids are going to grow up in a very different environment, 10 20 years from now. I mean, this data can be very critical, right? And how it is used is definitely something that people should pay thought to, right? So overall, I think this is a very very good new step. I think they're seeking consultation till about December 1st, and then
December 17th.
17th, is it? Okay, December 17th. And then this will be tabled in the next session of the parliament. Hopefully, this bill passes through. I mean, hopefully, it becomes a bill at the end of it, because we definitely require something like this. So, yeah, I mean, this is going to be a very important development, and I hope that we see fruition on this front sometime next year, as early as possible.
All right. So moving on to the next news item, the lock-in period for pre-IPO investors in companies like Zomato, Paytm, and Policy Bazaar will be expiring over the next few days. And SoftBank, that has been a major investor in all of these companies, have holdings worth $1.8 billion, and they will be powering its stakes gradually over the next 2 years so as to not trigger a panic selling. Now, SoftBank had cumulatively invested close to $2.2 billion in these three companies and offloaded shares worth $560 million at the IPOs. Paytm is the only company in this group where SoftBank's investment is in the red. But Roshan, tell us a bit more about how these pre-IPO investments work and what
Yeah.
implications does it have on retail investors.
So there is obviously a lock-in period post IPO, up to which your existing investors can't really dump their shares, right? I mean, because for obvious reasons. I mean, it'll devalue the shares, and it can be chaotic, right? And that period is now come to pass. But then again, I mean, it has to be a very gradual sort of offloading. I mean, my sense is they will all exit partially, book some profits, right? And that itself could kind of impact the share price for sure, right? But if you look at Zomato, Policy Bazaar, Paytm, etc., I mean, these have not been good IPOs, right? They listed at a premium, and today, I mean, they're down to half or one fourth of the valuations, right? I mean, Paytm, for example, listed at $20 billion. It's probably at around $4 or $5 billion at this point of time, right? So it's a difficult thing, it's absolutely difficult. We've all seen how Nika's shares have been tanking as well. Not a good time for tech IPOs, I would say.
Yeah, and while these lock-in periods are ending, Falguni Nair, the CEO of Nykaa, she's offering bonus shares to its pre-IPO investors so as to reduce them dumping their shares.
Yeah, I mean, as an existing investor of Nykaa, I'm very, very thankful for that, right? But yeah, I mean, I suppose it will kind of soften the blow, right? But see, the larger point is that I think what tech founders have gotten over the last year and a half is a taste for what the retail investor looks for, right? Retail investors are absolutely brutal, right? They're not like your private investors, VCP folks, right, who can think long term, and so on. Retail investors, it doesn't matter. I mean, if you're Tata, Reliance, whoever it is, they will cut you down to size. It's a very quarter say quarter third kind of a mentality, and you really have to show sustainable growth and profits. So I suppose, I mean, it's a period of adjustment. I mean, it's especially for these fast growing startups, it's going to take time. It's going to take time. I hope they're able to graduate to that next level and do better, I suppose.
This episode of the Startup Operator podcast is brought to you by Park Avenue. Now that we're all back at the office meeting colleagues and clients, it's time to ditch those PJs and look sharp with Park Avenue's range of 100% cotton, wrinkle-free shirts. They're super easy to maintain and keep you looking fresh through the day. So, my fellow startup operators, Visit the Park Avenue store or myraymond.com and check out the new wrinkle-free shirt collection.
Okay, so India is the world's second largest market for the gaming industry, right? It's second only to China, and according to recent reports, the gaming industry is expected to add over 1 lakh direct and indirect jobs within the next fiscal, that's FY23. And this sector is also projected to grow by 20% to 30% in the same period. The gaming industry will add jobs across domains like programming and other roles such as content writing, gaming journalists, and web analysts over the next few years. And with the coming to the metaverse, with Web3, crypto, gamification, all of these industries are these hot new industries where millennials and the young workforce
Yeah.
wants to join. So there's a lot of potential for growth. And we have had some amazing founders of gaming startups and game tech startups, and we have heard their stories. Anything that you can recollect at this right now?
See, couple of things, right? I think one is if you look at compute power over the last, like, even 5 years, I think it's dramatically increased, right? I mean, and you're going to see that happen more and more over the next 3 to 5 years. The amount of work that you can get done with X amount of dollars in 5 years will be way more compared to what you can do today, right? So that is going to really, really help. Going to help load all those high quality graphics and render a very nice experience to gamers. So that is one thing. Second thing is, I mean, we have made this point last roundup as well, right? This whole shift from a DAO economy to an ARPU economy is already happening, right? What we have discovered over the last year through monetization experiments of a bunch of these startups is that Indians can pay, right? I mean, so you don't only have a wide base of users, but you also have people who can pay 20, 30, 40, 100 rupees for stuff that they see value in, right? Given the combination of both, and along with the wide base of talent that we have in India, right? Quality engineering talent, I think India is going to be the home of any kind of gaming. We've seen Nazara Technologies, for example, List, and there are a bunch of all of these game tech startups as well, right? I mean, in fact, I'm going to be talking to the founder of Router coming up shortly, and very curious to understand, how they are executing this space. But yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating development, I should say.
Okay, moving on. Another thing of 2022 is that it's been a tough year for a lot of companies, especially within the edtech space. We have had Byju's, Vedantu, an academy, even Upgrad letting go of its workforce and losses increasing. And in contrast to all of this, Scalar has announced a 2,500% growth in its revenues in FY21 compared to FY20 and reported an annual revenue of $110 million in August. Along with that, they also announced a 10 days of paid leaves for its employees, calling them gratitude leaves, which will be rolled out from December 21 to January 1st as a way of thanking the team. I think these are great initiatives
Yeah.
undertaken by companies while the entire space is kind of going through some turmoil.
Yeah, I mean, it's very positive news amidst all of this doom and gloom, right? We've hosted Abhimanyu Saxena, who's the founder of Scalar, on the podcast, right? And he spoke about his vision of building a university of the future where we're providing real value to students. It's a fantastic episode. I spoke about various aspects. We'll link to it in the podcast description. Do check it out. This is a great way of thanking their team for all of the hard work they've put in. 110 million is a
Like
lot of cash. Yeah,
2,500x growth. I mean,
yeah,
wow.
amazing.
All right, so now let's spice things up a bit with the whole controversy between the Federation of Hotel and Restaurants Association of India and the OYO IPO. The FHRAI has written a letter to SEBI to stop OYO from launching its IPO in the wake of the fine imposed by CCI against OYO's alleged malpractices. Now, in a nutshell, CCI has imposed a fine of 392 crore rupees on Make My Trip, Go Ibibo, and OYO on the ground of unfair business practices. FHRA also alleged that OYO is responsible for the quote-unquote systematic depredation of the budget segment hotel business. OYO has, however, claimed that FHRAI is resorting to incorrect, sensational statements, and more developments on this matter are yet to come. But OYO has been a company that was supposedly one of the first batch of companies that was supposed to go IPO, but given the macroeconomic conditions, they have tabled its plans for later on. And right now we are seeing such developments. How do you
Yeah.
think this will pan out?
No, given OYO's economics, I think IPO plans are some distance away. In fact, I mean, I think SEBI itself has increased the number of days it takes to something like 115 days or 120 days to give an approval on IPO, probably preempting this stuff, right? The tech IPOs that have not done well. See, this is a classic case of the platform owning the product as well, right? I mean, and it's happened in multiple other segments. I mean, it's happened in e-commerce with Amazon and Flipkart and the likes. And this is something that has to be resolved. Right now, I mean, there's a lot of blurred boundaries. At any point of time, Competition Council of India can be involved, Ministry of Commerce can be involved, and bunch of these associations like the Restaurants Association, or the Traders Association, etc., can be involved. And I think it's time for like a proper draft policy on what the boundaries are, right? They're pretty much doing this in e-commerce, where they're talking about liabilities and we're talking about who you can promote, etc. But yeah, I mean, on this front as well, right? Because I think the restaurants have a point, the hotels do have a point that hey, I mean, if you are aggregating all of the demand using us, and then I mean, if you're funneling all of that into your own properties, right, you're effectively like pushing them out of competition, right? I think these things, as I've often said, I think better solved through innovation than regulation, but regulation is inevitable.
I mean, we have seen similar cases of other, industry forums voice their concerns against Swiggy's Dine Out app. And then again, when Zomato came up with the whole Zomato Gold program, again, there was a lot of issues that were voiced. But talking about Zomato and Swiggy and the entire food delivery space, this reminds me you were recently there in the Naan Curry podcast,
Yeah.
talking about 10-minute delivery phenomenon.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what was that like?
It was wonderful. I mean, Naan Curry podcast, for those who are not familiar, it's run by Archit and Sadaf. Very entertaining guys. I mean, I can't think of anyone else who can talk about chocolate and coriander and cumin for like an hour and a half and still make it so interesting. So it was a pleasant experience to be on the other side of the table for a change. We spoke about quick commerce, the importance of quick commerce. Is it really important? Why are people pouring in money, and how will this revolutionize the food and hospitality industry as such, right? So yeah, a bunch of interesting thoughts on that. Very different style to what I'm used to. A lot of fun. Do check it out. We will link to it in the podcast description, of course.
Okay, so moving on to some of the other headlines from this week. Lentra has raised $60 million as part of its Series B funding round, which was led by Bessemer Venture Partners, SIG, and City Ventures. Lentra offers a cloud-native full-stack platform that helps banks across the entire lending lifecycle. Now, this very well ties into the whole digitization conversation that we have had. EdTech platform SimplyLearn has raised $45 million from GSV Ventures, Clal Insurance, and Disrupt AD. Lenskart raised $39.6 million from Kirate Ventures, DSP India Fund, and Access Growth Avenues. Ready Assist, which is a roadside assistance startup, has raised $5 million from Hoven International Fund and SPC. And community monetization platform Conversite has raised Rs 37 crore or $4.6 million approximately in a pre-Series B round, which was led by Ivy Cap Ventures and Qualgrow Venture Capital. Now, these are startups from a wide variety of fields, and some of the ideas which the startups are working on is really interesting. Anything you'd like to add to this?
Yeah, so we've hosted Tamanna and Tarun from Conversite earlier, right? And they spoke about their fascinating journey of starting with a Facebook group and then making a product and a company out of it, right? Fantastic business, excellent founders. Do check it out as well. If you want to understand more about community building and monetization and so on, I think that's a fantastic primer. The other aspect is, I mean, I'm glad to see larger check sizes come back, right? I mean, 60 million, 38 million, so on and so forth. Yeah, I mean, Indian VCs have raised a lot of cash, and they're waiting to deploy in the right company. I mean, at this point of time, you might not see the 2021 optimism, but I think it's a matter of time. It's a matter of time. Maybe it might take 6 months, whatever, but there are startups that are worthy of investments, and they will attract money. Maybe not at the same ridiculous valuations that we saw in 21. But yeah, Lentra is an interesting company. They're digitizing the entire lending stack for banks, right, and offering a plug-and-play infrastructure. Yeah, I mean, it might be interesting to talk to the founders on the podcast. And of course, Lenskart is a legendary business. All of us got to know a little more about it via Shark Tank. But yeah, great businesses, and good to see this positive activity.
In this week's Park Avenue PowerPoint, we have this tweet by Louis Bacaj, who posts a thread of 9 uncomfortable truths about engineering and tech right now. and how Twitter might play out, the ramifications, and what Elon's calculus might be. Number one, small engineering teams move much faster than big teams. Obvious, but it still needs to be said. Elon has factored this in. Two, if you're willing to throw out large chunks of a system, you can rebuild the core parts in a fraction of the time with great people. Three, the domain complexity with Twitter is in the distributed system. There is a little valuable domain knowledge in the core functionality, and losing people hurts Elon less than what we might think. And of course, this goes on to a list of other pointers which we'll link in the description below. So, Roshan, what's your take on this?
Yeah, see, a lot of these guys, right, whether it's Google, Facebook, Apple, Twitter, and so on, I mean, they hired a ton of engineers over the last 3 or 4 years. In fact, even after all of these layoffs, some of them are at the numbers that they were at, in 2020 and 21, right? So it gives you an idea of, how much of bloat there is in the system. Obviously, I'm not saying that you need fewer engineers, but Elon is kind of demonstrating right now that probably you can make do with less, right? I mean, he has fired 50-60% of the workforce, and as a lot of people have commented, the app is still running, right? And nothing untoward has happened yet. So it could be an interesting experiment, and this thread again points out a lot of this value in having small agile teams, and nobody could have done this at this scale but Elon, right? Because he doesn't really have to answer to anyone, and he owns pretty much the entire company, right? And of course, I mean, people forget he is also CTO, right? I mean, if he can build cars and rockets, I mean, surely he can solve for distributed systems, right? So very, very interesting experiment ongoing, where he's iterating rapidly at Twitter scale. Interestingly, the DAOs have been going up, right? I mean, the DAOs have been going up. He's also sorting out the technical issues in terms of lag and latency and all of that. Yeah, it's fascinating stuff. I mean, it's great to see this play out live in front of us.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, the biggest the biggest news is also that Trump is now back on Twitter.
Yeah, yeah. So I think Elon had put up a poll, right, saying that should we have him back, and
It
I
was a
think
pretty
he's
even split though. I mean, it was 48 and 52%,
hey.
52 for.
I mean, that's how elections are, right? I mean, the last election in the US, I mean, wasn't even that far apart. I mean, it was even closer. So, but Trump hasn't tweeted yet, though. He's probably
Someone will
still
probably make an NFT of the tweet and then.
he's probably still rooting for Truth Social, which is his platform. Yeah.
All right, so before wrapping up this episode, Roshan will be having Pradeep Soundarajan, who's the founder of Mulya, back in the podcast again. And we've already spoken with Ashish Sidra, who is the founder of alike.io. Tell us more about this conversation.
Pradeep has done a fantastic job of building a community of very passionate testers and QA folks with Mulya, right? And I got to ask him various questions about how he's able to do that. So I would say it's a culture masterclass. Do check it out. Very, very fun episode recording with Pradeep. The other conversation with Ashish, we've not had a lot of travel founders on the podcast earlier. I mean, I can remember Hari of Pick Your Tail way back when, and he spoke about getting through COVID. See, COVID was hugely disruptive for all industries, but none more than travel and hospitality, right? I mean, it completely wrecked the industry. The way Ashish has built a bootstrap profitable venture over the last 5 or 6 years with alike.io is fantastic. And we spoke about various nuances of operating in the sector. There's definitely a lot to learn from that episode. So two very good conversations coming up next week.
Awesome. Right, folks. So with that, we come to the end of this week's roundup. Do let us know how we did in the comments below. And if you like the content, do click on the like button. If you have not already subscribed to our podcast, please subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Ghana, Amazon, or any other favorite podcast platforms that you may have. And also along with that, do rate us so that our discoverability goes up and more people like you can find our content. And if you like updates to be delivered straight into your WhatsApp inbox, you will find a link in the description below, which you can click on it. And yeah, apart from that, we'll see you again next week. Have a great week ahead.
See you guys. Have a great week ahead.